They say Rome forged the greatest leaders the world has ever known. Men who carved empires, bent nations to their will, and shaped history with brilliance, courage, and ruthlessness. But every now and then, Rome forged something else, something darker, something it could no longer control. And among all the emperors who walked the marble corridors of power, only one left a stain so deep, so terrifying that even centuries later, his name still echoes like a curse. Caligula, a boy born into a dynasty of blood, raised in the shadow of madness, crowned by fate as the most powerful man on earth. But what happens when absolute power is handed to someone broken long before he ever wore the purple? What happens when an empire creates its own monster? The Romans expected a savior. They got a storm. Almost overnight, rumors spread across the empire. Whispers of cruelty, of perversion, of a ruler who blurred the line between man and God and then shattered it completely. Some said he was a victim of trauma. Others swore he was evil incarnate. But all agreed on one thing. Rome had never seen anything like him. This is not just the story of an emperor gone mad. It's the story of a society that watched the signs, ignored them, fed them. A society that created a beast in its own image, and then trembled before what it had unleashed. Because Caligula wasn't born a monster, Rome made him one. And once the monster awoke, the empire realized it had no idea how to put it back to sleep. So before we judge Caligula, we must ask, who is truly responsible for the horrors that followed? The man, or the world that shaped him? Welcome to the darkest chapter of Imperial Rome. Before Caligula became the embodiment of imperial madness, he was simply Gaius, a fragile child born into a dynasty soaked in glory, poisoned by ambition and haunted by death. The Julio-Claudian family was the beating heart of Rome, yet behind the triumphal arches and marble palaces lay a world of betrayal so constant that fear became a way of life. Gaius grew up not among friends, but among threats. His father, Germanicus, Rome's golden hero, died suddenly under mysterious circumstances, leaving the empire in shock and his family in danger. His mother, Agrippina the Elder, outspoken and powerful, was exiled and starved. His brothers were hunted down and eliminated one by one. Anyone tied to Germanicus became a target, and the young Gaius watched the empire devour the people he loved most. By the time he was sent to live with Emperor Tiberius, he was no longer a child, but a survivor. When Caligula finally rose to power in the year 37 AD, Rome erupted in celebration. The Senate praised him. The people worshipped him. After the suffocating terror of Tiberius's rule, the empire saw in Caligula a new dawn, the last living son of Germanicus, a symbol of hope, continuity, and lost greatness. But beneath the cheers, beneath the golden facade of the young emperor, something deeply unsettling simmered. Some believed Caligula carried psychological scars too heavy for any mortal to bear. Others whispered that a darkness had always lived within him, and soon the cracks would begin to show, slowly at first, then violently, until Rome realized it had placed absolute power in the hands of someone it did not understand. This is the threshold, the moment before the storm breaks, the calm before Rome meets the monster it unknowingly helped create. Caligula's story does not begin with his rise to power, but with the chaos that shaped him long before the empire ever bowed at his feet. To understand the monster Rome created, we must first step into the world he inherited. A world where loyalty was a weapon and trust was a luxury no one could afford. Gaius Julius Caesar Germanicus, the boy later known as Caligula, was born into the center of Rome's most dangerous stage, the imperial family. His father, Germanicus, was the empire's shining star, a general loved not just by his soldiers but by the entire Roman population. His victories in Germania, his charisma, and his noble bearing made many believe he would one day become emperor. But fate, as it often did in Rome, intervened with cruelty. When Germanicus died suddenly on campaign, whispers filled the streets. Poison, betrayal, Tiberius's jealousy. No one could prove anything, yet everyone felt the same chill. The empire had lost its hero, and the Julio-Claudian house had gained a new fracture. Gaius was only a child, but he felt the tremor of that loss. The world around him tightened. His mother's grief turned into open defiance against Emperor Tiberius. His brothers became targets. His family was pushed to the edge of political extinction. One by one, they disappeared. Exiled, imprisoned, starved, erased, and somehow Gaius remained alive. His survival earned him a reputation, the child who walked through fire without burning. But trauma does not leave quietly. It sinks into the bones, waiting. Perhaps that is why, when Tiberius summoned Gaius to live with him on the island of Capri, Rome shuddered. Capri was not a sanctuary. It was a prison gilded with luxury, a palace of hidden horrors. Tiberius, withdrawn from Rome, governed from afar while indulging in a life of secrecy, paranoia, and rumored decadence. Into this world stepped Gaius, barely a teenager. Historians often debate what he witnessed on Capri. Some claim the stories were exaggerated by enemies. Others argue they barely scratched the surface. But even the most generous accounts agree on one thing. Capri was no place for a child. Gaius learned early how to navigate Tiberius's moods, how to stay invisible when needed, how to mimic affection to survive. Tiberius reportedly admired the boy's ability to hide his true emotions, calling him, chillingly, a serpent raised for the ruin of Rome. Whether prophecy or paranoia, the seed had been planted, and as Caligula grew, the empire watched him with equal parts fascination and dread. Was he the heir to Germanicus's greatness, or to Tiberius's darkness? Rome did not know it yet, but the answer was already forming. Inside the boy, the storm was gathering. When Tiberius died in 37 AD, Rome exhaled for the first time in years. The old emperor had ruled from the shadows, leaving the empire anxious, uncertain, and desperate for change. So when news spread that Caligula, the charming, youthful son of Germanicus, would take the throne, hope rippled through the streets like a long-awaited sunrise. The Senate praised him as the emperor they had prayed for. The Praetorian Guard lifted him onto their shoulders. Citizens flooded the temples, thanking the gods for delivering them from Tiberius's cold reign. Caligula was everything Rome wanted to believe in. The blood of Germanicus, the symbol of continuity, the promise of renewal. And for a brief moment, he lived up to the dream. His first months in power were marked by generosity and spectacle. He granted amnesty to political exiles, restored honors stripped by Tiberius, and honored his family's memory with public ceremonies that moved Rome to tears. He hosted lavish games, released prisoners, and opened the imperial treasury to relieve debts. People adored him, not out of duty, but out of genuine affection. But then something happened. In the first year of his reign, Caligula fell gravely ill. Ancient writers describe a fever so severe it nearly claimed his life. Some sources whisper of poisoning. Others suggest a physical collapse triggered by years of unprocessed trauma. But one consistent theme emerges across the accounts. Caligula rose from his sickbed changed. The Emperor Rome had embraced with hope, now looked at the world with eyes sharpened by fear, suspicion, and something darker. His behavior became erratic, his humor twisted, his generosity warped into indulgence. Where he once sought approval, he now demanded worship. It was as if the illness had not merely weakened him, but awakened something inside him. Some historians wonder whether Caligula suffered neurological damage, a condition that distorted his judgment, amplified paranoia, and dismantled the emotional restraints expected of a ruler. Others point to his childhood, arguing that years of witnessing violence, betrayal, and cruelty had finally caught up to him. Perhaps the illness was simply the breaking point. Whatever the reason, Rome realized too late that the emperor who returned to the palace was not the same man they had hailed as savior. Signs of instability began to spill into public life. The Senate was no longer his partner in governance, but a collection of enemies he suspected of treachery. The Praetorian Guard, once protectors, became potential threats. Even the Roman people, who had loved him so fiercely, now felt the chill of unpredictability. Whispers spread. Caligula is not well. Caligula is changing. Caligula has become someone else. But Rome had no idea how far this transformation would go, or how quickly the line between emperor and monster would begin to blur. Caligula's transformation did not unfold quietly. It erupted, sudden, violent, and impossible to ignore. What began as whispers soon became undeniable reality. The young emperor, who once symbolized hope, was slipping into a world shaped entirely by his own fears, fantasies, and appetites. The first signs came through paranoia. Caligula began to see enemies everywhere, in the Senate, in the Praetorian Guard, even among his closest advisors. Men who had once toasted his rise now found themselves under constant suspicion. A raised eyebrow, a hesitant pause, even a poorly timed compliment could be interpreted as treason. And Caligula acted swiftly. Executions became common. Confiscations of property became a convenient tool. Senators attended meetings in terror, unsure whether they would return home or be dragged to the Tullianum prison. Rome, which had so recently celebrated the dawn of a new era, now felt the ground shifting beneath it once again. But paranoia was only one side of his unraveling. The other was megalomania. Caligula did not merely want to rule Rome. He wanted to transcend it. He began referring to himself not just as emperor, but as a living god, demanding temples, altars, and statues erected in his honor. He fused his identity with Jupiter, Apollo, even Venus, as if the boundaries between deities and mortals no longer applied to him. At first, some Romans laughed nervously, hoping it was theatrical flair. But the humor dissolved when Caligula insisted that senators bow before him as a divine being, or when he ordered that sacred temples replace their statues of gods with images of himself. Then came the extravagance. Lavish feasts drained the imperial treasury. Spectacles meant to showcase power instead revealed obsession. Caligula built luxurious ships decorated with marble and gold, floating palaces designed more for fantasy than function. He commissioned impossible construction projects, bridges over the sea, new palaces, and architectural wonders meant to defy reality itself. Yet beneath the glittering surface lay something more disturbing. Caligula began blurring moral boundaries with reckless abandon. He humiliated senators by taking their wives or demanding their daughters attend him in private. He hosted banquets where decorum dissolved into chaos, where power was measured not by rank but by willingness to submit to the emperor's whims. Those who resisted risked ruin. Those who yielded fed the legend of a ruler whose appetite knew no limits. But perhaps the most unnerving part was this. Caligula believed Rome owed him everything: obedience, devotion, sacrifice, because Rome had nearly lost him to illness. In his mind, survival was proof of divinity. Trauma became power. Fear became entitlement. And the empire, once complicit in shaping the boy, now stood helpless before the man he had become. Still, the darkest chapters were yet to unfold. Caligula's descent was only beginning, and Rome would soon learn what happens when absolute power fuses with unchecked madness. By the time Caligula's paranoia and megalomania had reshaped the imperial court, Rome was no longer merely watching his transformation. It was living inside it. Every decision he made, every whim he indulged, rippled through the empire like a shockwave. And now something even more dangerous began to take root. A growing obsession with absolute control, expressed not only through terror, but through humiliation. Caligula understood something few rulers dared to acknowledge. Fear alone could enforce obedience, but humiliation could break a man's spirit entirely, and breaking spirits became one of his favored tools. He targeted the Senate first. Once proud, once influential, the senators found themselves reduced to props in Caligula's twisted theater of power. He would summon them to the palace only to force them to run alongside his litter like servants. He mocked their speeches, confiscated their estates, and accused them of crimes invented on the spot. The Senate had survived tyrants before, but never a ruler who treated them not as rivals, but as playthings. Caligula's cruelty grew bolder. He took pleasure in turning honor into punishment. When a wealthy Roman left behind an inheritance, Caligula would claim it, insisting the deceased had meant to make him heir. If anyone complained, he doubled the tax. If someone hesitated during a performance or failed to applaud with enough enthusiasm, he would order guards to drag the offender away. To Caligula, power was not real unless everyone else felt powerless. Yet the most infamous expression of his dominance came through acts that blurred the line between shocking display and psychological warfare. He paraded his sisters before the court as if they were trophies of his dynasty, women both adored and trapped by his authority. He intruded into marriages, took wives from their husbands for the night, and returned them humiliated. These acts weren't driven solely by desire, but by the thrill of proving that no household, no family, no bond was beyond his reach. Even the gods became targets of his theatrical cruelty. Caligula ordered bridges built across sacred bays, demanded offerings usually reserved for Jupiter, and staged elaborate rituals in which he played divine roles. At times he mocked the gods openly, at others he demanded worship as if he were one of them. Rome had seen emperors flirt with divinity before, but never with such intensity, never with such hunger. And then came the moment that crystallized his descent into infamy. Caligula appointed his beloved horse, Incitatus, to public office, giving the animal a marble stable, a jeweled collar, and servants dedicated solely to its comfort. Whether he intended it as satire or as an insult to the Senate remains debated. But the message was unmistakable. Even my horse is worth more than you. Rome had seen cruelty before. Rome had endured tyranny before. But what Caligula unleashed was something different. A reign not of politics or ambition, but of psychological domination. And the empire sensed that worse was still to come. By now, Rome was living under an emperor who no longer recognized boundaries, moral, political, or even human. Caligula's whims dictated reality, and the empire bent under the weight of his impulses. But cruelty and humiliation were only the surface of his descent. Beneath them lurked something far more destabilizing. Caligula's need to remake Rome according to his own fractured imagination. He pushed the empire into financial chaos. The generosity that once endeared him to the public had long since transformed into reckless spending. Lavish games, extravagant feasts, outrageous construction projects, all funded not by strategy but by compulsion. He exhausted the imperial treasury at a pace Rome had never seen. When the money ran out, he did not cut expenses. He invented new sources of revenue. He imposed taxes on marriage, lawsuits, brothels, and even the wages of soldiers. He revived treason trials not for justice, but for profit. Confiscating property before sentencing was even passed. Wealthy Romans lived in fear of being accused of imaginary crimes simply because Caligula needed their estates. But the financial strain was only part of the chaos. Caligula's foreign policy veered between absurdity and danger. He prepared massive military campaigns that ended in farce, like the infamous moment when he ordered his legions to the northern shore of Gaul, only to command them to gather seashells as spoils of war. To Caligula, this bizarre act symbolized his victory over Neptune, the god of the sea. To Rome, it symbolized something far more terrifying, the emperor's break from reality. Yet, even amid these displays, glimpses of intelligence flickered. Some scholars argue that Caligula's bizarre actions were meant to mock the Senate or to expose the emptiness of conquest. But whatever his intention, the consequences were real. Rome's allies grew uneasy. Its enemies grew bold. The stability of the empire trembled. Inside the palace, Caligula's personal life spiraled into something even darker. He took pleasure in unpredictable cruelty, rewarding servants one moment and torturing them the next. He forced families to watch executions, turning death into entertainment. He delighted in fear the way other rulers delighted in triumph. And increasingly, his actions suggested a growing fascination with mortality, not just of others, but of Rome itself. He boasted that he could execute anyone at any time, even saying he wished all Romans had a single neck, so he could strike it with one blow. The empire was suffocating. The Praetorian Guard, once loyal, now whispered among themselves. The Senate, though humiliated, was beginning to consider the unthinkable. And Caligula, he moved through his palace as though untouchable, unstoppable, a man convinced that destiny and divinity placed him above consequence. But fate was closing in. Rome had birthed the monster. Soon it would try to cage him. By the final months of Caligula's reign, Rome was a city holding its breath. Every street, every corridor of the Palatine, every whispered conversation reflected the same chilling truth. The emperor had crossed a threshold from which there was no return. He no longer ruled through policy or fear alone. He ruled through chaos, as if testing how far absolute power could twist reality before the entire empire shattered. And Rome, once the architect of order, now found itself at the mercy of a single man's unraveling mind. Caligula's demands became increasingly impossible. He ordered new temples built overnight, commanded the relocation of entire cities, and made laws that contradicted themselves within days. He spoke openly of replacing the heads of statues of gods with his own likeness. He threatened senators not just with execution, but with the extinction of their bloodlines. Even the Praetorian Guard, sworn to protect him, became victims of his casual cruelty. But the moment that sealed his fate came when Caligula crossed a line no emperor had dared approach. He began dismantling the very institutions that held Rome together. He mocked the Praetorians publicly. He threatened to move the capital to Alexandria. He hinted that he might eliminate the Senate altogether. To Rome's elite, it no longer mattered whether Caligula was mad, traumatized, or intoxicated by power. What mattered was survival, and Caligula had made it clear that no one's life, legacy, or loyalty could shield them from his wrath. The conspiracy formed quietly. Cassius Chaerea, a member of the Praetorian Guard whom Caligula humiliated relentlessly, emerged as its cornerstone. Senators, officers, and even palace servants whispered in the dark. They did not plot out of heroism. They plotted out of desperation. The plan was simple. Strike when Caligula was most vulnerable. Not in war, not among the Senate, but in the very heart of the palace where he believed himself untouchable. The moment came on January 24th, 41 AD. Caligula, leaving a series of theatrical games held in his honor, walked through a narrow passage beneath the palace. The corridor was filled with noise from the festivities, but in the shadows, figures waited. When Chaerea stepped forward, Caligula reportedly sneered, expecting another insult. Instead, the blade entered his chest. Chaos erupted. More conspirators rushed in. Stab after stab, Caligula, the emperor who believed himself a god, fell not on a battlefield, not surrounded by legions, but on the cold palace floor, betrayed by those closest to him. His wife and young daughter were murdered soon after, as Rome tried to erase not just the emperor, but the threat of his bloodline. The Senate even debated restoring the Republic, convinced the imperial system itself had birthed the monster. But Rome was not innocent. Caligula was not created in a vacuum. He was shaped by fear, trauma, corruption, political predators, and a system that rewarded cruelty as long as it preserved power. Rome forged him and then recoiled from its own creation. Caligula died that day, but the question he left behind would haunt history forever. Did Rome destroy the monster, or simply destroy the mirror it feared to look into? In the end, Caligula's story is not just the story of a single emperor's madness. It is the story of a world that forged him, wounded him, crowned him, and then feared the very thing it created. Rome wanted a hero, but it raised a child in fear, surrounded him with betrayal, used him as a symbol, and expected him to emerge untouched by the cruelty that shaped his every breath. Caligula became a monster, yes, but he became Rome's monster. His reign stands as one of history's darkest warnings. When a society normalizes corruption, violence, and paranoia, it should not be surprised when those same forces rise to power wearing a crown. Rome believed it controlled destiny. Caligula proved destiny can turn on its creators. And yet, even after his death, the empire marched on. The Senate failed to restore the Republic. A new emperor rose. Life continued. But the shadow of Caligula never truly disappeared. His life forces us to ask difficult questions, not about ancient Rome, but about ourselves. What do we create through our systems? What do we tolerate until it's too late? And how much of the monster lies not in the individual, but in the world that shaped them? If you've enjoyed this deep dive into one of history's most haunting figures, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video with anyone who loves exploring the hidden corners of the past. Remember, we are the ones who remember, the ones who question, the ones who refuse to bow to the silence of history. And you, are you ready for the next secret of Rome?